What is going on, everybody? My name is Sam, or Wakeman VGC, whatever you may know me as. Um, and today, I'm going to be talking about Tailwind in VGC Draft. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things, kind of analyzing some of the different setters, and as well as kind of going over, like it says here, how good is it and how much do you really need it? Because I definitely think that people oftentimes undervalue Tailwind on their draft teams. Um, so so what is Tailwind? Just in case you're watching this and you're new to competitive Pokemon in any way, it is a flying type status move that doubles the speed of your mons for 4 turns. Um, I'm gonna be mostly focusing on Regulation H style draft. Um, and I actually think A B C D E F. I think that should actually say whatever the regulation is that allows legendaries, but not restricteds and mythicals. I think that's Reg H, but it could be Reg F. So apologies if I'm wrong on that. But there are 66 fully evolved Pokemon that learn Tailwind, um, but not all of them are equally good. And I think knowing which one to take when is a very, very valuable skill to have as a drafter. So, priority Tailwind is kind of generally considered to be the best Tailwind. Um, these Pokemon are prime examples of it. There's also Fletchinder, the baby form of um, Talonflame. I didn't include it just because I don't think it quite stands up to the level of these guys, but it is technically priority Tailwind. And um, generally speaking, with these Pokemon, if you throw a cloak on them or you protect turn one in front of fake out, whatever it is, you will be getting Tailwind up. And so typically when I'm prepping against a prankster or like a priority Tailwind mon, I'm not really thinking how do I stop Tailwind and more I need to match it and then outspeed them under like when we're both under Tailwind, or I need to survive their Tailwind turns and then set it later. Um, because really, if your opponent has a Tornadus or a Whimsicott and they want to get Tailwind up, they most likely will be able to. Talonflame is kind of an exception. It is priority, but if you have some type of move like Fake Out or Feint, you can break its Gale Wings, which gives it priority, and then it won't have priority anymore. So there's a little more counterplay um, that allows you to stop the Talonflame from getting it up, but the others pretty much they're gonna get it up. And so um, Tornadus and Whimsicott I think are generally considered to be the premier Tailwind setters in the format. You draft them because you want Tailwind. Now they both also have other very good things about them. Whimsicott has Prankster Encore, which is ludicrous, as do the bugs Illumise and Volbeat. Um, on a tier list like my leagues, the Great Lakes Draft Leagues list, Tornadus and Whimsicott are both tier 1 Pokemon. They're the most expensive tier because they're just that consistent at doing what they want to do. Torn also has Bleak Wind and Bleak Wind Storm and other status moves that are very helpful. Icy Wind is really good too. And then Talonflame and Murkrow are generally like tier 2-ish mons, and Volbeat and Illumise kind of. I think we've had them in tier 2, and I think they're currently in tier 3. They kind of go back and forth. Prankster Tailwind and Prankster Encore is a really, really broken combination, as Whimsicott shows us, but they're lower speed tier and just generally like bad stats and offensive presence makes them a little bit, actually kind of significantly worse than the others in my opinion. Um, but that being said, while priority is generally like the most consistent way to get Tailwind up, it is not a requirement. These are all Pokemon that I consider to be relatively consistent at getting Tailwind up. Some of them are kind of team specific, like Jumpluff, you're only really going to take it on a Sun team. And on a Sun team, it is like the fastest Tailwind in the game that's not priority. Um, but I think Iron Jugulus and Roaring Moon kind of stand on a tier of their own amongst this group of Pokemon. Booster Energy allows them to get a free Choice Scarf without having to lock into a move. Choice Scarf Tailwind, I think it used to be more popular in Gen 8 when you could just like set Tailwind and then max it and ignore the Choice Lock, or it was just you just got more reward out of locking into Tailwind and then having your partner Dynamax and just sweep their whole team. But like I think in this gen it's pretty difficult to justify choice locking into Tailwind. Um, but Roaring Moon and Iron Jugulus get that benefit of a choice scarf without having to lock into Tailwind. And Roaring Moon has a 119 base speed stat, and Iron Jugulus has a 108 base speed stat. So they're both very fast. Roaring Moon is the fastest Tailwind in the game that is not Prankster. But Kilowattrel and Noivern and Ribombee are also kind of just general good setters. You've got Kilo has a base 125 speed tier. I think Ribombee's 124 and Noivern is 123. So they're all one apart, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I mean they are good, and because they're fast, they're still good at getting Tailwind up, but they also have some consistency issues in terms of, for instance, you can't really make them immune to Fake Out and like Prankster Taunt at the same time. Ribombee is an exception because it has an ability that stops Fake Out from flinching it, which is really huge. But generally speaking, they have a lot of item pressure in terms of like Cloak or Sash, and it's kind of an annoying 50-50 when you're playing against them, or Mental Herb. But then once you see their item, it does give you kind of more guaranteed ways to get killed before they get Tailwind up, if that makes sense. But like I said, like these Pokemon are still very good. If these Pokemon are your Tailwind setter and I'm evaluating a team, like I have to respect these Pokemon still, especially if Jumpluff is there under Sun. So when is Tailwind needed? Generally speaking, there are a lot of Pokemon, as stated here, that where their only weakness is their speed stat. Think Pokemon like Goldengo, Great Tusk, the Urshifus, Baxcalibur. The list can go on and on, right? So if you draft your team around kind of a top tier like that, that like has that speed stat that's kind of awkward, Tailwind is, in my opinion, pretty much a necessity. Because especially because all or five if you count the Urshifu separately, all of those Pokemon are top tiers. Like they're all tier 1s, and so I think that you kind of need to support your tier 1s properly, right? And you don't need a tier 1 Tailwind setter necessarily, but you need good Tailwind for these kind of Pokemon, in my opinion. I think the other thing is like you cannot have too much speed control. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a Sun team. Like I've got Lilligant, Torkoal. That's a very popular one this gen, right? That's a very scary combo. Lilligant and Torkoal does not want to face down Prankster Tailwind, because Torkoal does most of its damage by having full HP and clicking Eruption. And then obviously like Lilligant is just frail. So Lilligant is really fast when there's no opposing speed control, but suddenly your opponent has a Whimsicott and clicks Tailwind, then whatever Pokemon is next to Whimsicott is really threatening your core. So even on teams where you have some built-in speed, like ways to get kind of a free speed advantage, you still really want to have some option to match Tailwind. Because when you go into those Prankster Tailwind teams, you're really not going to be able to keep up. Because the main advantage, the main reason you draft a Pokemon like Lilligant kind of goes away. the other benefit to this is there are a lot of really turbo broken Pokemon this generation, such as both Ursaluna forms and Iron Hands, even stuff like Tyranitar, King Gambit, and Namorous Therian. I don't know why I didn't finish that last sentence at the end of the slide, so I apologize about that. But you really just you can make these Pokemon that are normally kind of Trick Room abusers turn into fast mode offensive threats. And in my opinion, that just adding that flexibility to these Pokemon fixes one of their flaws, which normally if Tailwind doesn't exist, it's like if I can stop Trick Room from going up, then these Pokemon are never going to be going first, and I can then deal with them more easily. But if you, let's say, have Trick Room and Tailwind on these kind of teams, then it gets really difficult for the opponent to prep for both of those, and it's like it's difficult sometimes to stop Trick Room and Tailwind with the same lead, for instance. So a lot of the times you may be putting someone in a situation where they kind of have to guess, or they have to let you get your speed control up and then react, which I find to be difficult if your speed control is good enough. Um, I in particular have found some relative success with Pokemon like Ursaluna. Under Tailwind, it also helps that a lot of Tailwind setters are immune to Earthquake, and so you can set Tailwind and then click Earthquake next to them, and it's a very potent offensive core. But it just adds flexibility to Pokemon that are already kind of over the top good. So then this is an analysis. I plugged in all of the teams from the PDPL Season 4 draft. The PDPL is the Pokemon Draft Premier League, and I've thought it would be a good exercise to kind of analyze these teams and look at which ones prioritized powerful Tailwind setters, which ones did not, and then look at why they did or didn't. The PDPL, for those who don't know, it's an invite-only league. Obviously, it's impossible to get the exact 12 best players on the planet into one league. Like, that's just not, you can't do that. But Dan, or like Dan the Man 15, or Stout Gaming, I think is more what he goes by now, runs it, and he invites people, and it's generally a very, very high level of competition. It's players who all have league wins and perform very consistently. And it's a very fun league to be a part of as someone who's played in it. This is my third season now. So if you look here, I've labeled inconsistent or secondary Tailwind setters in red. Secondary are ones that I consider to be, you're not drafting them for the express purpose of setting Tailwind, but they can set Tailwind if needed. Or they're just bad at it. Like Braviary, I consider to be not a good Tailwind setter. The orange are ones that I would consider respectable, consistent setters. Like either something you have to respect in prep because they're good enough at setting Tailwind, or something like Pelipper where it's very likely to just have Tailwind anyway just because it doesn't have a whole lot of moves it wants to run, and it's going to be there because like Squirrely's team, for instance, like it's a rain team. It's going to have Tailwind. It's going to have Pelipper. Like, you're going to see Pelipper. And so, if you look at it, Flamingo, Otto, Charles, and Toxic all drafted priority Tailwind setters. The only ones that... And this is actually, honestly, a little lower than I feel like I'm used to seeing. Talonflame and Whimsicott both did not get drafted. Which, you know, with only 12 teams, that's a relatively small sample size, so it's difficult to say why that is. But if you consider the orange, 8 out of 12 have reliable Tailwind setters. They're either bulky fast or have priority, which makes them consistent. There is also kind of another subsection of Tailwind setters that I didn't cover. Something like a Suicune. It is immune to Fake Out with its inner focus ability, and it is just basically unable to be one shot. So that's another like pretty good Tailwind setter. But generally the slow, bulky ones I find to be not great in comparison. Something like a Corviknight I don't consider to be a very good Tailwind setter. Um, but for so again, every team has Tailwind. Out of the 12, 8 of them have reliable Tailwind, and then 4 of them have what I consider to be Pokemon that are not reliably setting Tailwind. I think particularly Dominic and Snoot, um, Yanma and Skiploom are just not good enough to justify bringing very often. They're just low tier picks just to like cover the Tailwind option in case you need it, but I don't expect either of them to bring them very much. Um, Stranger Danger has Frostmoth and Braviary. Um, Again, not the best Tailwind setters in their own regards. They both do other things very well. Frostmoth is a great setup sweeper. Braviary is a very good Intimidate deterrent because it has Defiant. And then Pedons, Drifloon for that kind of unburdened mode with Thwacky. It is actually relatively difficult to stop Drifloon from setting Tailwind if it is on terrain. So I honestly maybe could have included that in orange. The only reason I didn't was because it is paired with Thwacky, and I think if you're leading Drifloon Thwacky, you've maybe got some other problems to worry about than setting Tailwind up. And then Articuno, again, it does technically get Tailwind. That's probably not generally what it's here for on this team, but it is technically an option it has. Um, so 2 of those teams that don't have strong Tailwind have access to Prankster Thunderwave or just generally other forms of speed control. Snoot, for instance, has Booster Speed, Icy Wind, Valiant, and Prankster Thunderwave Thunderous, which those kind of methods of speed control I will discuss later. And then Stranger Danger likewise has Booster Speed, Electro Webs on Sandy Shocks, and Prankster Thunderwave on Klefki. There are pros and cons to those different kinds of speed control that we'll get into in a minute here. Dominic just has enough priority that, in my opinion, it justifies not having insane Tailwind. Though, as we'll find out later, I do think it would be better with Tailwind. And then Pedons, the team is very bulky, and I think that can contribute to a lack of need for Tailwind. I probably would like there to be a more consistent Tailwind setter on that team because I think stuff like Ogerpon and Prim really benefit from that, but it's not, it's not a requirement, right? So that being said, these are some other kind of forms of speed control. Trick Room is, in my opinion, the other method of speed control that's pretty much mandatory to have on a team. I think if you draft a team that doesn't have a Pokemon that learns Trick Room at all, you are really putting yourself at a disadvantage. Again, I think there are exceptions, like Dominic's team. The double priority core from Chenpao and Entei plus the Amoonguss as kind of an anti-Trick Room option, I think lends itself to having better counterplay to Trick Room, despite not necessarily having a Pokemon that learns Trick Room. But I think it's very important to have a Pokemon on a team that can set Trick Room or reverse Trick Room, right? Like, it doesn't have to be. The issue I have is if you don't have Trick Room on your team, then if somebody does get it up, you have very little way to interact with it. But it's very good if you think your opponent's going to set Tailwind that you can set Trick Room in the back. We've all seen the glorious Focus Sash Trick Room Fluttermane on lead in draft. I mean, I sure have seen it a couple times now. Maybe it's because I draft Prankster Tailwind every single league I'm in. But it's a natural counter to Tailwind because if both are active, then likely the team with the Trick Room up, or the team without the Tailwind up, will be going first because the opposing team is going to have all their speeds doubled. Prankster, Thunderwave, and Scary Face I think are very consistent. Thunderwave is broken in the fact that it isn't just speed control, but it's also very disruptive, and 1/3 of the time your opponent just doesn't get to play. It is also permanent, which if you think your games are going to go long, then I do think it can be better than Tailwind, but it has the downside of only affecting one Pokemon at a time. Icy Wind and Electro Web, we see them a lot on stuff like Fluttermane and Iron Bundle and Iron Valiant and uh, Sandy Shocks. Those kind of Pokemon that have like free booster energy. Um, they can run that with very little opportunity cost. Or there's also just some Pokemon that just randomly will click it with a Scarf, like um, something like Greninja or whatever it may be. Um, and then ability-based speed control, which I maybe wouldn't even consider speed control as much as speed advantage, because you're not affecting your opponent's ability to go first, like with their whole team, and you're not affecting your partner, but it is a way to increase your speed. So then, generally speaking, do you need it? And in my opinion, yes. You should have it on pretty much all of your teams, in my opinion. Now, does that mean you need a tier 1 or tier 2 Tailwind setter on every single team you draft? Absolutely not. Um, but if you have other consistent forms of speed control, you may need it less. Now, something like Grumpig as your Trick Room setter and Electrode as your Thunderwave bot is not very compelling to me. If I'm evaluating a team, I'm gonna say that team, if it has no Tailwind and then it's like Grumpig and Electrode, I'm gonna say that team struggles with speed control because those are not consistent options. Whereas if you have something like Furgraph and Thunderous Eye, with that ability to block incoming priority with Furgraph, it's one of the most, if not probably the most consistent Trick Room setter in the game. And Thunderous, which is fast and has Prankster and can click Thunderwave on your opponent's whole team. I think those things, if you had both of those and no Tailwind, I may be like, okay, that's probably not so bad. You probably have some counterplay there. And then the other question is, do you have Pokemon that want it? If your top tiers are something like Fluttermane and Spectrier, you may not need it. I mean, in my opinion, you still probably want it, because you want the ability to match opposing Tailwind. But if you have something like Goldengo and Great Tusk, in my opinion, you better have good Tailwind. Like something like an Iron Jugulus Roaring Moon at the very least. You should have a good Tailwind with those Pokemon. And then, kind of touched on this a minute ago, but how do you know how much to spend on Tailwind? And this can be a really difficult thing to figure out, I think. Like I said, if your fast mode is like, or if your top tiers are like Fluttermane and I mean, you're not gonna have Fluttermane and Spectre on the same team, but those were just things that came to my mind, right? If those are your top tiers on a team, like you might not need Tornadus Eye or Whimsicott, right? Like, I mean, it wouldn't be bad. Like I said, you're never really gonna have too much speed control. I mean, I guess you now that I say that, you probably could, but it would take a lot, right? And so, if you have top tiers that already have some ability to go really fast or ability to control speed on their own built in, you may not need to spend quite as much on a top shelf Tailwind user. But if you have, like I said before, something like Goldengo, Great Tusk, Baxcalibur, I think the Urshifus fall into this category. Anything that is a very potent offensive threat that falls in like especially if it falls into like the 70 to 110 ish speed tier, I think is when you're really looking at like, okay, this Pokemon does need a good Tailwind setter. And as I said before, you want to support what you have properly. If your tier 1s are both mid-speedy offensive threats, then you better have a good Tailwind setter in tier 2, right? Because you are helping your tier 1s function as tier 1s, because they're supposed to be the best Pokemon on your team. Whereas something like, let's say you got like a tier 4 Greninja or like a, tier 5 Belly Bolt or something, right? Like, you don't those Pokemon you don't need to put as many resources into because they don't need to perform quite to the level that your tier ones do, in order to justify their place on a team, in my opinion. Um, and like I said, if you have really good speed control elsewhere, you may be able to justify a cheaper one. Um, I think that the option of having cheaper Tailwind, like Jugulus, Talonflame, Kilowattrel, Noivern, whatever it is still very valuable because it gives you room to get more top tier abusers for it. So if you take Torn Eye, you're not going to be able to get as many other tier ones to benefit from that Tailwind. Now, granted, because it's Scarlet and Violet Pokemon Gen 9 and they power crept us insanely, like tier 2 still has some crazy stuff in there. And then, like, analyzing these teams, right? Like, Flamingo has Volbeat. That makes a lot of sense for his team. He already has good speed control with Fluttermane, so he doesn't need a tippy top tier Tailwind setter. I think similarly with Otto, he just has enough bulk on his team. Raging Bolt is very hard to kill. Sinistra is very hard to kill. Ninetales and Titan and Snow can be very difficult to kill. His team is just bulky enough that having a cheaper Tailwind setter is especially worthwhile, especially because you also have to consider the other utility options that your Tailwind setter has, right? Illumise, I think the chief among its alternative options are stuff like Encore and Fake Tears, which I think Fake Tears is very good on this team in particular to support Raging Bolt. Um, and then if you look like all the way on the right at my team, you've got Goldengo and Garchomp and Cinderace and Rotom that are all in that kind of area that, in my opinion, where it's like you want good Tailwind. And then Azumarill, it falls into the category I was talking about earlier, where it's like 50 speed, great under Trick Room, but also you can run like 156 speed or whatever and make it outspeed like base 130 Pokemon or even like a Chenpao if you're really committed to it, right? You can do that. I think you can still run Adamant if you outspeed those base 135s. So it just adds another layer of flexibility because if I didn't have really good Tailwind, Azumarill might be something that you only really have to worry about if Trick Room is up. But now that I have a really good Tailwind, it's like, okay, Azumarill could be fast and it could outspeed me under Tailwind, which is something that my opponents have to look out for. So in conclusion, I honestly thought this would be longer. Draft more Tailwind, and then when you draft more Tailwind and you start winning more, you can thank me. But just trust me. I have been playing draft for a while now. I have some decent performances, and I think that in my experience, when I have Tailwind, the game just feels easier. When I have a good Tailwind setter, um, I have, I think, gotten a lot of really good use out of. I mean, particularly Iron Jugulus. That's kind of become one of my signature Pokemon at this point. But Tornadus Eye and Whimsicott I've also drafted. I've drafted Illumise and Talonflame, Kilowattrel and Noivern. I've pretty much drafted all of the Tailwind setters, Murkrow, and actually I haven't drafted Roaring Moon yet, which is kind of funny. You think I would have by now. But every time I have one of those Pokemon, it just makes the game feel easier. And I've had a couple seasons where I intentionally didn't take a good Tailwind setter, and it made the game feel more complicated. And I am personally a fan of simplifying this game down as much as I possibly can, because I think the simpler it is, the more you can focus on in-game decision making and adaptation, and it makes your prep simpler, which I think is a good thing for everybody. But that being said, thank you very much for listening to my little 30-minute rant about my VGC draft opinions. Definitely keep in mind these are my opinions, but based on my experience of playing draft and watching other people draft and all this kind of stuff, I've seen these trends and I feel like I wanted to talk about them. I want to keep making these kind of videos. I have really been meaning to do this for a while now, but I've been in school for such a long time that I really haven't had the chance. But now that I'm finishing up with school, I've got a lot more free time on my hands after the next like week or so is done. So let me know. DM me on Discord or put it in the comments on this video if there's any other topics you want to see covered a little more in depth like this. I'm planning on getting very, very specific eventually. I'm going to start with some more general concepts, but I really want to get into the nitty gritty of how to win in this game, because it's a hard game, especially in draft. I think it's very difficult to win. So yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Maybe next time I'll have a script, but don't count on it. And thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.